Great. We get started. Thanks everyone for being here. And my name is Eddie Avila. I'm the Rising Voices Director at Global Voices. And we've had the privilege of getting to know over the last 14 years or so, 13 years or so, dozens and dozens of language activists who are quite inspiring, who are quite committed, and who are doing lots of great things to promote their language in digital spaces. And as we saw along the way, language cuts across many parts of people's lives, and especially in regards to rights and human rights, whether it's access to information, freedom of expression, and also for this project, visual security, keeping people safer online. And so, as a part of that, we worked with some of our colleagues to put together this project to explore how language cuts across language communities' ability to keep relatively safe online. And so we have three of our colleagues here today to share their work, to share their background, to share their research, but just I wanted to provide a little more context about this project. And so for the first part of this project, we ran a broad survey asking activists about their own digital safety and security habits, but also their perceptions about their language communities. And as you can see, sorry, some of the findings of those 62 activists, only about 6% said they were able to access digital security information in their local language. We're talking about indigenous, minoritized, or low resource languages, so all across the spectrum, including languages that may have more than 1 million speakers but have relatively few resources online, but all the way to languages that may have only a few thousand speakers. 90% reported that it was difficult to find information how to protect themselves online, and 83%, 84% said that finding information in other languages would be easy. So, I think we saw along the way that language is an important factor in how communities can find resources, how to protect themselves online. And of the 62 participants in the survey, we asked 18 of them, or all 62 of them were interested in going deeper for the next phase of the project, which was a case study, but only we were able to select 18. And we had from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. You can see the different languages represented from Ghana, from Nigeria, from South Africa, from Kenya, also from Asia with India, Nepal, and Pakistan. In Latin America, we had Ecuador, Guatemala, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela. And so it's a very diverse group of researchers, and each of them, again, started from a different starting point, looking at unique contexts, but I think we saw throughout the process there was, an interest in exploring how language can affect how people can access information to keep themselves safer online. And this is the team. This is the research team of the language activists. And we had a project support team that helped them behind the scenes to help them, decide on their research questions, research methods, how to analyze their findings, how to present their findings. But basically, we wanted each researcher to, leverage their local knowledge, leverage their existing connections that many researchers don't have access to. I think that's what made this project really unique, that we had those local perspectives, those people that knew, what people were doing on the ground. And I think that's what made this project really unique, is to have those perspectives and the ability to decide for themselves, kind of the path to explore that. Some used focus groups, some had interviews, some did observations, some, their own experience of being embedded with the community. And we have a landing page, which I'll put in the chat. And you can see all the different essays, summary articles that were either written by the researcher, co-written with another colleague, but finding a way to present what they feel was most important within that research. I just wanted to point out that also originally we had planned for, one illustrator, one artist to accompany each of the articles with a piece of art that was uniform across the board. But in conversations with the researchers, with our team, we thought it was really important that we find illustrators from those language communities or from the region or from the country, because they would be in a better position to, find ways to represent the community in a more respectful and more, culturally sensitive manner. And so you can see some of the art, which was really fascinating. And one of our researchers also was one of our illustrators, so we had we were benefited from his work as well. So I don't want to speak too long. I just want to provide a little bit of context into kind of what this project was about. But I want those who are here to hear directly from the researchers themselves to present themselves, introduce themselves, but also talk about their work. And we will start with Zita from Ghana, and she'll talk more about her work.
Thank you, Eddie, and hello to our audience. My name is Zita. One of the researchers for the Indigenous project that Eddie has introduced. I am a digital activist. I co-founded a nonprofit organization that educates Ghanaians on the use of open source tools like Wikipedia. And recently, one of our focus is documenting Indigenous languages in Ghana on Wikipedia. And one of those languages is the Twi language, which is spoken by the Ashantis. That is mostly people from the southern part of Ghana. And it is one of the most spoken languages in Ghana. So I am part of several groups that is being managed by the organization, which is Global Open Initiative Foundation. And one of them is for coordinating work amongst the Twi Wikimedia community. So I realized that there were a lot of spamming incidents happening on this group, and that got me curious to understand what the root cause is. And I think that was the motivation that made me participate in the research about digital security. The initial phase was very productive, working with the Rising Voices team to come up with the research design. And, it's been an iterative process. It gave us the opportunity to refine the research design until, not refining it in the initial stage, but as you move on to the various stages, you tend to go back to the first stage to update or change anything that you feel wasn't working. And I think that was a really useful process. So as part of my research design, some of the methods that I used or some of the activities that happened during this research phase included having to have conversations with three of the leadership team of the organization, which is the Twi Wikimedians community. And I also had to observe the platforms that these members were using to coordinate their work. So in summary, the methods that I used for collecting the data were mixed. I didn't have any specific method. It was a combination of observation, reading through news articles, reports, and having this interview conversations. And all these methods led me to gather enough data. And in analyzing this data, I was able to group the information into various sections, and one of them has to do with digital practices. So one of the things that I learned from this research and from the True community is there is the knowledge. Most of them have knowledge of digital security and its importance, but when it comes to how to apply digital security practices, it is a problem. And one of the interesting things I learned was many of the members use social media platforms, but not many of them are able to even read the privacy policies around these platforms. And as a result, they tend to experience, a lot of security issues. For instance, like I mentioned before, spamming. There's also hacking. Some of them experience hacking on their Facebook platforms. So some of all these things was my motivation. I wanted to understand what was causing this. Was it a lack of knowledge about digital security, or was it a lack of resources being available to them to read about and learn about digital security practices? So the research showed that not only is it about a lack of knowledge, like I said, they have knowledge, basic knowledge about digital security and its importance, but how to apply it, what are the practices that can be effective? For instance, one of the participants, the manager of the WhatsApp group, when I asked her what digital security practice she applies, she said the only digital security practice she knows is the two-factor authentication system on WhatsApp. So that made me, want to understand more. Are there any other practices apart from that? And she said no. That is the only thing she knows, and that is the only thing that she uses. And I went further to ask her about password changes. And from all the three people that I had conversations with, I realized that only one person changes their password often. Apart from their digital security practices, one of the things that I discovered was about policies and laws around privacy and security in Ghana. And I think there are, what I found was that there are 4 information technology related laws in Ghana, and none of these laws addresses cyber crimes like hacking. And so it was very difficult to even come across any successful cases that have been addressed in the courts with the existing laws, which are around cybersecurity, the Electronic Protection Act, and I think the Data Protection Act. So there was also the issue of the current judicial system not being developed in a modern way to even address some of these cyber security or security related issues. So as part of my research recommendations, I mentioned that there is a huge need to create awareness about digital security amongst indigenous communities in Ghana and in Africa at large. Another thing that I discovered through my research that led to my second recommendation about creating more resources in indigenous languages is that there were no resources. I could not find any resources that were created in the language of the people. They say that if you communicate to people in their native language, you speak to their heart. So I feel if there are more resources in their native language, it might encourage them, or it might encourage them to read more or learn more about digital security. So my second recommendation is for us to create enough resources in Tree and other indigenous languages as much as possible. And my third recommendation is about reviewing and developing the necessary legislations to ensure that people who experience some of these hacking and financial attacks can be able to use the law to seek the necessary punishment for the perpetrators of these crimes, and that can ensure that more of these crimes are not committed. The other recommendation I made was for the government to implement or modernize the judicial system, so that the law can be so that the judicial system can be able to enforce the existing legislations, because I don't think it makes sense to have laws that cannot be enforced. So once we have the laws and the policies in place, the judicial system should be able to enforce the laws with the necessary institutions and systems put in place. So that's about it. I don't know. Should I bounce it back to you, Eddie?
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks, Azita. And we'll have time for questions at the end. So thanks for sharing. Your work was about a year-long process. I think it expanded much more than we thought, in a good way. We also did a kind of exit survey with all the researchers, and almost across the board, people indicated they would have liked to go even deeper, talk to even more people or have more time to do this. And so it's definitely there's definitely a demand for this. As I mentioned, we did the initial survey for 62 different activists from 62 communities, and we asked how many of you would you like to potentially be part of the next round of the next 18 case studies, and all 62 were interested. And so unfortunately we had to only pick 18 and try to find a balance between different parts of the world. But I think it definitely shows that there's a lot of interest, and hopefully this project can kind of raise awareness about the need to consider language when talking about not only digital security, but also all types of digital rights. Before I hand it over to Jerry for her presentation, I want to recognize Theodora. She's also a Global Voices colleague, because this was a multilingual project. She helped with some of the translation from Spanish to English. So thank you, Theodora, for being here and seeing kind of the fruits of some of your work as well. Thanks. So Jerry, please introduce yourself, and you can share your screen as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Eddie. As I bring up my screen, I hope you can all see it. Zita, that was a great presentation or discussion that you took us through, and insights that you shared about the research that you did. My case study as part of this project was to look at the Kikuyu language spoken in Kenya, that is in East Africa, and the technology use, as well as the work of digital activism that is happening within the Kikuyu language activists. I will interchange between the words Gikuyu and Kikuyu, because I am a native speaker of the language, and the pronunciation of the community and the language that is spoken by the community will vary. So when I am using my native language, it is Gikuyu, but when I'm using English, it is Kikuyu, and both are quite okay. And so just to give you a bit of background on what the presentation will be focusing on is an introduction of myself and how I chose to go about the research, give you some background and context on specifically on the language and the community and why that was of interest to me, the research and methodology that I used, the results, as well as recommendations. A bit about myself. Apart from being a poet and a writer, I am also a language and cultural advocate. And the organization that I run, called Afro Kids, is working on recording and archiving, as well as creatively reinterpreting African children's folklore. And my work around the advocacy of my native language, that is Kikuyu or Gikuyu, has been in the form of the poetry that I write and perform. And I have been doing that for quite a number of years now. And just looking at the language that I was focusing on, the language activists that I'm focusing on, and to just give you a bit of context, it is a growing language spoken as a first language by 6.6 million Kenyans. And I wanted to look at the different ways in which this language is used online. Now, an introduction of the project, I was looking at the work, motivations, and experiences of the indigenous language speakers, as well as activists on social media platforms. And this particular project took time between January and June of last year. Now, the platforms that I was looking at were particularly social media platforms. That's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. That is where the focus of my research was. And I was looking at the way that language activists and advocates are using Kikuyu language in either to teach, use the language for communication, to entertain, inform, or even engage with each other. Now, some background and context. As I mentioned, Kikuyu or Gikuyu, pronounced Kikuyu like that, is a Bantu language spoken by 22% of Kenya's population. That's approximately, so you'll notice initially had indicated 6 million, but the latest figures are on at 7 million, and this is according to the 2019 Kenya Population and Housing Census. And you will see that apart from English and Kiswahili, and those are the two national and official languages, Kikuyu language comes third. Now, also to give you a bit of context maybe from a global scale, some well-known global personalities from the Kikuyu community and also who have used the language on a global scale. We have Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is an author, playwright, academic, and African languages advocate. And he has been one of the staunch advocates for use of African languages and the power of translation. And we also have Professor Wangari Maathai. And the reason why I've put her there is because of her work, not just as an environmental and political activist, but the fact that she was also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Then to jump straight into the methods and data. So I used both quantitative and qualitative methodology to carry out the research. So under quantitative methodology, this was basically identifying informants and creating a questionnaire that would help in understanding, let's say, technology use, understanding aspects of disinformation, understanding preference on social media platforms used, the number of social media platforms that the language activists use and their preference, as well as the aspect, the question of digital security. Now, the second step was on the qualitative method, and this was doing a social media analysis of the participants of the survey and analyzing the conversations, posts, and comments that were being shared using several or often used hashtags. One of the hashtags that I found quite actively with a lot of analysis, with a lot of data that I could analyze was this hashtag that is called Gikuyu Twitter. and that helped give a very good understanding of the conversations that go on among the Kikuyu language activists, as well as understand the sentiments that are shared by either native language speakers or non-language speakers about this language activists. Then after that, I did a data analysis, and this is basically just reading through the data, identifying trends and commonalities, beginning to draw parallels and interpreting the data, and then eventually doing a summary of findings and recommendations. Now, looking at the questionnaire that was administered in English and contained 31 questions in 5 categories, and this included demographic information, technology use, as I've talked about, digital security and disinformation. And looking at the demographic insights and motivations, some of the insights that I was able to draw is that a majority of the respondents operate as individuals. Thus, the quest to become language activists or advocates is a personal choice for most of them. And so they don't have any organization, they're not part of an organization that is running these efforts. And so this speaks to also that for them, it's a passion project. It's a labor of love, that they're not being paid to do the work. And a lot of the times the data that they purchase and the time that they are using is actually an expense that they're willing to take on. Now, again, 40% of the respondents operate as a group. And again, not as an organization, but probably 2 individuals who were able to find a common love for the language and decided to come together and either run a podcast or run a social media page or something like that. Then what I noticed, what was very interesting, is that one of the longest running efforts has been an individual who has been doing this for 12 years. So there was a Kikuyu language activist who has been on Twitter for the last 12 years and has been doing the work of advocacy, informing and educating those in the Twitter space about the Kikuyu language, the Kikuyu culture, and basically advocating for the language. Then most of the respondents have been operating for less than 5 years, and they live in a city in Kenya. Then and it's also good to understand the motivation for a lot of this. And what I noted is that for most, a love for the language and culture, and that feeling of the need to preserve the language, which most felt was deteriorating, or the fact that a lot of Kikuyu people from the Kikuyu community were no longer using the language for one reason or the other. Now, looking at technology use, and some of the insights that I was able to draw is that a majority of these language activists use their smartphones, and that's so 50% own a smartphone and a laptop, but most of them preferred using their smartphone. Then there was an aversion to other social media platforms, particularly Facebook, which a lot of them noted there is little tolerance to the work that they do. And so a lot of them, 3 out of 5 respondents said that they prefer using the Twitter platform. Now, looking at digital security, now, whereas all respondents shared, common concern about their security, most indicated that they felt confident about their ability to handle any threats or nuisances that may come their way. And what I also noted and what the respondents shared was that there is great concern for their security, both online and offline. And there is a comment that, so going to this quote that one of the respondents shared, that somebody felt that their use of, let me just paraphrase it. Somebody felt that my use of Kikuyu to express myself is tribal and primitive and went ahead to threaten physical harm. And that just speaks to some of the concerns and some of the vitriol that they have to deal with. But one of the fascinating things that I found is that a lot of these language activists were confident in their ability to handle any threats that they deal with. What I noted from insights and the findings is that they know how to use to keep their identity hidden. And they also use they're also able to use virtual private networks. And so for a lot of these language activists, Kikuyu language activists, they don't use their actual names online. They do not reveal their identities. You will not see their photos. So you cannot use any identifying information to pick them out in a crowd. Now, then the other insight is that all respondents indicated knowing how to use social media security features, including how to block, report online users for bullying, harassment on the respective platforms. And that was really encouraging to read. One of the other areas that I was curious to know about is disinformation and fake news, because this project came at a time when Kenya was going through its general presidential elections that were happening in August. And as I mentioned, this project took place between January and June. And so capturing the information or capturing this insights around disinformation and fake news was really important to do because of what has been happening in, because of histories of disinformation and disinformation during Kenyan elections in the past. And so on the question of that, all 5 respondents indicated that they had encountered fake news. And for some, it was a daily basis. Now, for others, it was a weekly basis. But I think one thing to draw from this particular aspect of the research is that most were able to know how to discern fake news, and they had resources that they could be able to fact check and things like that. So the recommendations based on the insights is that there's a need for recognition and tolerance, not just for Gikuyu language speakers, but also for the use of African languages on social media platforms, especially on Twitter. Now, when asked for their proposal on how the internet and social media could be a better place for their work, one of the respondents said, through the recognition by internet users that Gikuyu is a language like any other, and no language is superior. And that was a very, and I found that to be a very impactful statement. Now, most of the Kikuyu language users online face great intolerance, backlash, tribal slurs, intimidation by fellow Kenyans by using what some feel like is an inferior language. And I think I covered that from the quote that I shared. Now what the other recommendation is on, so this is also to capture some of the challenges. And this is a tweet that I did a screenshot of, and the translation here. So this lady called Kami Watahi was reacting to someone who was complaining that she's tweeting a lot in Kikuyu. And so her response was, whose mother tongue do you want me to speak in? And you will see a lot of this happening, especially and the pushback by a lot of the language activists. And though it's encouraging, there is a lot of intolerance that we see. And a lot of the times such language activists have to really be on their toes and just and speak up against such comments. Now, still going on the recommendations is on the need for translation service on the social media platforms. So there is no support for Gikuyu language, and this has continued to greatly contribute to lack of tolerance by online users who do not speak the language, as they're not able to translate and therefore left out of conversations. So I think if there was a way that, like, let's say for the Twitter platform, where a tweet like this, someone could click on the translate on the translate tweet and it gave them a correct translation, then that I believe would greatly help and create better tolerance. And that is one of the frustrations that some of the language speakers were sharing about the language. And I just wanted to skip to this. And this is just capturing one of the frustrations that the language speakers were having with the Twitter platform, to the point of just speaking to the Twitter, to those behind the Twitter handle directly. So you'll notice that on the tweet on the left side, the translation that is being offered is they're saying that it's the Kikuyu tweet is being translated into Latvian, and the other language speaker is very frustrated and telling them that there's a language called Kikuyu. And this just goes to, you know, speak to the frustrations that a lot of the language speakers, not just in Kikuyu, but in other African languages, are having to go through. Then I think I've covered that quote that came from one of the participants of the survey. And just to note that social media platforms rely on Google Translation service in order to provide translation for posts shared in languages other than English. And so the limitation is that Google doesn't translate, Google Translate does not support Kikuyu language and most of other African languages. And thus social media posts that are done in the language are often mistaken for either Indonesian, Kinyarwanda, or Latvian, and therefore translated in the text that is often gibberish. I think before I finish, I would like also to mention that there's also the limitation, which I failed to capture here, on the lack of support of a keyboard, Kikuyu language keyboard. So that is not available. It is available for smartphone users, but it is not available. And again, it's also technical for smartphone users. You have to know which keyboard to get. I think it's a Microsoft Swift keys. And it's a bit technical for you to get that, virtual keyboard. For laptop users or desktop users, you just have to type whatever your text you're doing in an application like Microsoft Word, and then move it to a social media platform, which can be quite frustrating. I will finish by saying negado, and that is thank you in my mother tongue, Ikoyo. I'm happy to take any questions or comments from you. Thank you. Back to you, Eddie.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we'll have the comments and questions after the last presentation by Sia. I just wanted to note, I put in the chat, each of these 18 articles are also translated back into the local language, which is the subject of the study. Because I think originally the number one audience for this project is the local language communities. That is not simply extracting information and using it for another purpose, but we want to make sure that it goes back to the community. And so even though this is in text, we're also exploring other ways to share the findings in other multimedia formats. So it's kind of an ongoing process. Even though this first phase officially ended, there's just so much information there, so much we want to support the researchers to support their own communities after identifying priorities and needs and challenges. And I think that's what this first phase is, to explore that as a jumping point to see what's next. And so hopefully there is a what's next, but you could see the translation of the article in English. So I think that was really, really powerful. Last but not least, I want to introduce Sia. He'll be talking about his work in South Africa. Sia, go ahead.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Jerry. Very insightful. And Ursula, okay, thank you as well. The screen, I've got. I need to remember how to do this. So you see images or an image. Can everyone see an image?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So my name is Sia Masugu. I am a graphic novelist based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I work mostly with children's books or children's comics. And I also work with young adult graphic novels. I write, I illustrate, and independently publish these through a company I founded in 2016, Sia Funda Online, which is primarily focused on the documenting stories in indigenous languages and publishing them in indigenous languages. And our sole mission at Siafunda, we're quite a small team, and a small team of dedicated language activists. And our sole mission is to create or celebrate indigenous languages through storytelling or children's literature. We publish picture books or graphic novels, and we always try and adapt these stories from print to digital. The significance of adapting storytelling across multiple platforms for a diverse audience has become Siafunda Online's competitive advantage. The International Decade of Indigenous Languages is an important event which draws attention to the loss of indigenous languages. And there is an urgent need to preserve and protect these indigenous languages. The International Decade's focus is on the human rights of indigenous language users. In line with the UNESCO's vision, Siafunda has been committed to storytelling using indigenous languages for print and online consumption since 2016. Our three core customer value propositions are: we've discovered that teachers and parents alike, they want to create an environment where children make reading habitual. We've also discovered that the teachers and caregivers, they need to have their children reading in their mother tongues. There are fears that children are more likely to read in English because they become so accustomed to the English language, and they find their mother tongue quite intimidating to read. And our three core product value propositions are, firstly, the benefits. Our stories seek to inspire young readers to go curious. We also believe that from an experience point of view, the young readers could gain a lot in terms of growing bigger hearts and hopefully becomes better empathetic individuals. And in terms of the features that we produce through our stories is try and adapt them from print into digital. And if they started in oral, we take them to print and eventually online. And I guess the key question is, how can African indigenous languages in indigenous language communities be safer online? Rising Voices, as Eddie has already explained to us, just to reiterate, has aims to extend the benefits and reach of citizen media by connecting online media activists around the world and supporting their best ideas. Rising Voices has seen the need for information about safer and more secure communication channels and habits in indigenous languages and language communities as a priority. And I guess the one big question that this particular project or campaign has, the digital security and language campaign, the one big question that it does raise is, what are the challenges and needs for activists and their communities speaking indigenous languages in regards to digital safety and security? Being born, raised, growing up in South Africa, it's got quite a rich history of political inequality, as most of the people in the world would know, and quite bluntly, apartheid has been quite a big thing in South African history, and obviously most people who live in South Africa would still argue whether apartheid has completely ended or not. But this has hugely influenced how our diversity as South Africans in terms of language, culture, and amongst other things. We have 11 official languages in South Africa, 9 of which are officially coined the indigenous languages of South Africa. A more in-depth search on Wikipedia, you'll find that there are at least 33 languages that are indigenous to South Africa. So I am from the isiZulu or AmaZulu, meaning the Zulu people, and we speak the language isiZulu, which is the most widely spoken language in the country, well, in Southern Africa, at 24.7%. Growing up in Soweto, in fact, in various regions in Soweto, I was exposed to children who spoke languages different from my own, isiZulu. Some of the children I became friends with when I was a child came from impoverished homes. Some came from affluent homes. This gave me a better perspective of my own upbringing as I grew older. While I was privileged to attend schools in the suburbs of Johannesburg, some of my friends at the time went to township schools and schools such as Mseni Primary School, which is the school I have targeted for this case study. Mseni Primary School has been in operation since 1972. It is located in it is one of the 32 Soweto townships located in Mdeni. It's in one of the 32 Soweto townships located in Mdeni, which is in the south of Johannesburg. There are about 500 Black teachers, Black learners at the school. They all start from grade R up to grade 4. There are 22 teachers, 19 of which are female, 3 of which are male, and all of them Black. The school's first language is isiZulu. However, the teachers do teach in English as and when they choose. For the units of analysis, I focus mainly on the teachers of Mseni Primary School. Again, this is a school located in the Zulu community of Mdeni, Soweto, Johannesburg. And this is a place particularly where internet infrastructure is either inadequate or underused. The key research questions were: 1, how do teachers perform professional duties without their safe and secure internet connection? Secondly, when the internet is required, what is it used for? 3, is internet connectivity safer at the school or at home, and why? 4, how much time do teachers spend on the internet for school-related work? 5, what devices do teachers use to connect to the internet? 6, which service provider do teachers prefer, and what are the monthly data costs? 7, how do staff members communicate online, and how frequently does it happen? And 8, how does the school communicate with other schools with or without the internet? The research objective was to understand if Mseni Primary School infrastructure provides opportunities for a safe and secure internet connection. Furthermore, how such facilities lend themselves to the advancement of the indigenous people and their indigenous languages. The importance of this study was for teachers in township schools was to state that teachers in township schools deserve equal opportunity to internet infrastructure. Failing to provide township schools with a safe and secure internet connection is a discrimination against teachers of indigenous languages and young learners. And my 3 main learnings from this: teachers in the Department of Education do not communicate well. The Education Department does not keep its promises to the teachers. The tools may be available, but the teachers may not be trained to use them. And I strongly feel that it is important for adults to understand that the future of indigenous children depends on them. If the township schools don't get a safe and secure internet connection, it jeopardizes the futures of young learners and their indigenous languages. And some recommendations that came out of this study are that the state must hold online workshops for teachers and educate them about their digital rights. Secondly, the school needs a website. This would help the school gain access to more teachers who are even more qualified, more learners, and more sponsorship in future. The state should ensure that each teacher gets assigned their own electronic devices. Fourth, in the event a teacher is absent or must take leave, their devices must remain untouched by other staff members unless specific arrangements are made. In this way, teachers will have better conditions to meet safely online with a decrease in health risks when viruses are at large. And lastly, internet users ought to be deliberate about contributing towards the advancement of indigenous languages on the internet. And the article or the case is, of course, easily accessible through the Rising Voices website. I'll hopefully add a link before the end of the session, and it's called Beyond Infrastructure, Digital Safety Needs for an isiZulu Speaking Township School in Johannesburg. The article is available in English, isiZulu, and Spanish. And to that, I say thank you so much for your time.
Great, thanks so much. I shared the links in the chats.
Thank you.
Yes, let's just jump right into the questions. I know we started a little bit late, so I don't know if we could go over 2 or 3 minutes after. But Jennifer has a question. Are you seeing interest in your communities in federated social media such as Mastodon or Fediverse?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Are you seeing interest in your communities in federated social media such as Mastodon, which is sort of, I guess, the alternative to Twitter, a more decentralized, method?
Sure, I'll jump into that. I'm not fond of Mastodon, but thanks for bringing this to my attention. If you could please add a link so I can have a better look at it. But yes, there is, in our community locally, there has been a rise in artists. It's mainly artists in the sense that these are illustrators or designers, and they've been investing a lot in the metaverse, specifically the NFT community, as everyone would be aware of that. And I remember looking into it, I think it was a year or two ago when it started booming in this country. And I just found it difficult to really get into it. Mainly also the language barrier was a thing. A lot of the metaverse community has its own jargon and terminologies, as you might be aware. And obviously, indigenous languages need to catch up with that to be able to be fully fledged in that environment. However, it's still going strong in this country, and I do feel that even from an isiZulu speaker, it's something that isiZulu writers and language activists should be looking into as well. So it's something I do vouch for, yes. I hope I've answered the question there.
Just to pick up where Sia has left off, I haven't done that much research on Mastodon because my initial experience wasn't that great. And I guess because I went into Mastodon thinking that I would have the same user experience as Twitter. I didn't. It was quite difficult to navigate. And so I haven't been able to look around much. Fediverse, I've just heard about it. But one of the things that I'd like to mention, especially around African language activists and the platforms that have been very effective and something that I think is offers a great opportunity to language activists is podcasting. And I have written about that. I will see if I can dig up on the article that I did on African language podcasters. And actually three of the respondents in my research have been running podcasts in Kikuyu, and that has turned out to be a very effective platform. And I guess this speaks to the objectives of this language activists. They want to be able to share in the joy of the language. They want to be able to inform, educate, and entertain. And I think for them, podcasting has been able to offer all those, and then now they have been able to offer that as an anchor, and then now social media platforms become sort of like basically distribution channels and marketing channels for the content that they've already created on their podcasts.
Yeah, our third speaker, Zita, had to run, but I think what we're seeing is also, TikTok is very popular because of the oral possibilities. Many languages in Latin America, many speakers do not read or write or feel comfortable reading and writing in their language, so they prefer to express themselves orally. And I think that's sort of one of the limitations of Twitter and other spaces like that. There's a question from Brian. Extremely useful research. I found that the use of trusted interlocutors quite beneficial in the legitimacy of the project. Question: most of the indigenous languages were legislated out of prominence. Is there a role for local policy? So I mean, I think with this project, there's just so much to dig deep. Why do languages get to this point where there's very little resources available? But Jerry or Sia, can you talk about maybe that angle of it? Maybe the historical context of why some of your language got to this point where there isn't much support for it on official level.
Sorry,
What,
Eddie,
are you,
just,
what are you or what?
sorry, come again. I didn't quite get your question.
There's a question for Brian about is there a role for local policy in helping, kind of reverse this trend of, in languages being marginalized in society? And it's all interrelated in terms of, how local policy affects whether or not there's support for these languages, not only for digital safety and security, but for all aspects of life.
Okay, Eddie, I could give an example, but it's not in the context of what we were speaking on, which is on social media. One of the things that I have seen and it offers some promise is the implementation of language policies and the teaching of African languages in schools, and that is something that Kenya was able to do very well in the 80s. There was an African language policy and the teaching of African languages, a policy that was implemented within the school curriculum. It died off in the 90s and the 2000s, but with the current education system that is currently being implemented, that has come back. But what the challenges that are facing are sort of coming in the way of that being realized is the lack of goodwill and the lack of resources to support that. So the policy is there, and though it's still very early to tell, because the new curriculum has only been in effect for about 4 years now, and so the government is still trying to grapple with the new curriculum itself, apart from just the language policy. But I see that as being one of the very effective ways of dealing with this challenge, because then once you're having children being able to learn these languages in school, then as a parent, in being able to pick up from where the teacher left off in the classroom and having that in your own home setting becomes a bit easier.
Thanks for that, Jerry. And to add, I mean, I'm not very well versed on the political side of things. I mean, I'm just someone who enjoys art and enjoys storytelling. But I could add that I think the responsibility is one mainly on each and every individual. If your mother tongue is Gikuyu, am I pronouncing it right? And the responsibility is for every person who was born in a household where Gikuyu is the mother tongue to speak it and to be proud of it. To wait and rely on the government, I've never really believed it's going to solve anything. Having said that, we should also hold our governments accountable for this. I know in our country, in South Africa, the ruling government is the African National Congress currently, and they've been ruling for over 2 decades now. And as to why English is still the dominant language when you walk into a library, when you walk into a shopping mall, that still puzzles me. It should be indigenous languages that are out there, even at the airports, and visitors, like we do when we go to Japan or France or Germany. We need to be reading the language of the indigenous people there. So that's my response for that, Brian. I'm with you on that one. I'm also questioning, why is it that our languages are still not are still looked at upon and marginalized in this day and age?
Time for one more question. I know we have another session coming up, but maybe a quick response for this from Theodora. How much does the state or official entities support digital security in your indigenous language?
In South Africa, look, you really have to put your hand up or put your foot forward and apply for grants, apply for the state to subsidize projects and everything. It's very hard to come by, places. There's a lot of illegitimations, so things are not so clear cut. The state does have opportunities to support, but to actually get to those opportunities, they normally end up with some celebrity or some popular figure who's got close sort of relations with people who are in charge of these sort of things. And these are sort of things that we need to fix as well. So yeah, I'm hoping that down the line, these sort of things will change, but the state funds are always there. They just don't get managed well oftentimes.
Is there anything to add for that?
Eddie, I don't have much to share. I think it's interesting to see the similarities in the efforts that are being led by creatives and by language advocates, and the lack of support and goodwill and support, not just in terms of policies in the public space, but also resources for these languages, and seeing the similarities in the two countries. And it's something that I have observed when it comes to the use of African languages across various African nations, and even the use and reliance of English among newer generations, and also the efforts that are going towards the preservation of the languages, and not just on the digital platforms, but also with efforts like what Sia is doing with coming up with resources in terms of books, and that's encouraging to see.
Great. I know we always run out of time in these rich conversations, but just to close off, I think I think the spirit of activists that we know we work with is sort of a do-it-yourself approach, that let's not wait around for the government or NGOs to do this work for us, but let's do it ourselves. And I think we see that across the board. And Jerry and Sia and Zita are very excellent examples of bridges that can have access to that knowledge and help bridge that for local communities. I think that's the spirit of this project, is have people like them be those bridges and continue to find ways to support them so they can support their community. So thanks again for coming. Thanks for those who may be seeing this later. I appreciate everyone's interest and attendance. And thanks, Sia. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Sita. Thanks, Soledad, for helping us put this together. So thanks, and have a good rest of the day, rest of the evening, rest of the night. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.